Welcome to the Exponential Minds Podcast. The research, development, launch, and growth of new technologies is creating incredible momentum in the modern world. Join futurist Nikolas Badminton as he talks with the innovators and the exponential minds that are tackling some of the biggest problems and creating solutions that are propelling humanity to the next level.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Exponential Minds Podcast. My name is Nikolas Badminton. I'm a futurist. I help my clients look out 5, 10, 20 years into the future so they can create bolder visions, strengthen strategic planning, and anticipate risk. And I'm very excited today to have Rotem Petranker on the Exponential Minds Podcast with me. Rotem has a Bachelor of Science in Psychology from the University of Toronto and an MA in Social Psychology from York University. He's currently a PhD student at York's Clinical Psychology Program, and his main area of research is affect regulation and the way it interacts with the sustained attention, mind-wandering, and creativity. Rotem co-founded the Psychedelic Studies Research Program at the University of Toronto and the Canadian Centre for Psychedelic Science. And he's a pioneer in the study of microdosing psychedelics using modern rigorous research methods. He also feels strongly that the principles of open science are necessary in order to do good research. Is currently in the process of starting the first lab study of microdosing in Canada. Rotem, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Nick.
It's good to have you here, and
like
we always do, I'd love you to give us a little bit of your background and how you sort of ended up in this area of focusing a lot of your work in looking at microdosing and psychedelics.
Yeah, for sure. I've been interested in kind of mind expanding techniques, often referred to as psychotechnologies, for a long time. I started meditating when I was 19. I also had a pretty meaningful near-death experience when I was in my early 20s. So I was always kind of into these kind of ways of mapping consciousness, expanding consciousness. And so some years ago, when I heard through a friend that they're starting a reading group about psychedelics, with all the psychedelic renaissance that is going on right now, I said, hey, sure, I'll join your reading group. And then when I joined the reading group, I realized that we could be doing this research. We don't just need to, read about it. And so that is when I started with my colleague, Thomas Anderson, our research group.
It's kind of interesting. In sort of the mid-2000s, very much like you, I sort of had an awakening. I didn't have a near-death experience, but very much I had some PTSD that was fixed using EMDR, and it was like, wow, okay, the mind is sort of malleable. You can do some things with this, and nevertheless, I went off to explore and experiment and talk to people that were trying to map that consciousness, expand the mind, fix trauma, and a number of different things. But transhumanism, biohacking became more popular in sort of the early to mid 2000s. But I knew it from like the counterculture. So, hackers and artists and creatives, they were sourcing LSD on the dark web, and they were, even synthesizing psilocybin or grinding down the mushrooms that they were buying illegally. And they were experimenting with microdosing all the way up to, accountants in big four consultancies. I had a friend lean over to me in a meeting. We were talking about the future of retail, and before her partner came in, the boss, she was like, Nick, I've been microdosing mushrooms for about 3 weeks now. I said, how's that going? She goes, sometimes it takes a little while to get out the house if I get the dosing wrong, but mostly it's great. So we're finding ourselves now in this interesting world where we're now today, research organizations, universities, private companies are getting licenses to grow, extract, synthesize, ketamine, MDMA, DMT, LSD, psilocybin for research and eventual commercial purposes. I mean, why the big change? Why is this renaissance sort of underway?
Wow, that's an excellent question. And I think it's something that a lot of bigger brains than mine are trying to currently figure out. I think I can give you my 2 cents. And again, I should preface by saying I'm more in the science. I'm not so much, I don't understand society so much, but my running theory is that this is related to the what's referred to as the meaning crisis. We have a problem in society. It's been growing. We have forgone our traditional institutions of wisdom, such as our religions, our tribes or families, and a lot of our just traditions. We have kind of left them behind, and we have not really taken up anything else to give us meaning to our lives. Like, what do you get up for in the morning? If you know that in the end you're going to die anyway, then none of this matters. Then this is a slippery slope to an existential crisis and deep depression. And so I think that actually Michael Pollan said, I think in his book, I think he very astutely observed that psychedelics are kind of, they give you a direct experience of what before you were supposed to believe that your priests and rabbis and all your other religious leaders, they had the direct experience and they relate it to you. And the psychedelics, you can really experience it for yourself. And I think that it is, in a way, it provides an antidote to this felt sense of meaninglessness. All of a sudden, you're in direct communion with the ineffable and you feel at one with the world, right? These are things that keep coming up in the context of psychedelics. So I think that, I know for a fact that we are in the midst of a major mental health crisis. It is only getting worse. And I think that as a society, we're at the point where we say, you know what, some things may have been taboo, but we're still willing to give them a shot because we are at our wits' end. And so in a way, we've hit rock bottom as a culture. So it's kind of an exciting time because it's hopefully all up from here.
It seems like the kids are more willing to try this stuff and not be, I grew up in sort of Prozac nation. Everyone needs to feel better. Here's a convenient tablet from big pharmaceuticals, whether that's Prozac or any other sort of SRI. And and now the kids are like, hey, actually, there are these natural things that I can experiment with. I know LSD is synthesized, but things like DMT, things like psilocybin are out there in nature, and a lot of people are saying things like these and peyote and whatever were like the birth of all religion, right? And Moses sees the burning bush. Sure, it's kind of interesting, but what's interesting is what you're looking at with your work in microdosing is this isn't about everyone having a massive epiphany and suddenly the world changes every week or so because of some sort of deep epic dose of psychedelic. This is more about microdosing, right? And you talk about, you're doing studies into personality, mental health, creativity. Can you take us through a little bit of some of the studies you've been running and what you've been finding?
Sure. I do just want to start by saying, responding to the bigger topic that you kind of hinted at. It's weird. It's weird that microdosing works. It's weird because the running theory right now in the psychedelics community is that you need to have this major epiphany. You need to really take a large dose, and that's what's going to get you good and sober somehow. And with microdosing, you ostensibly feel nothing. So maybe it's all just chemistry. Maybe it's just the new Prozac. And I think that that's interesting. I don't have a horse in this race. I let the data lead me. But I think that if this is the case, then we kind of need to rewrite the theory of psychedelics as we know it.
It's interesting because I read sort of the Psychedelic Explorers Guide with James Fadiman back in the day, and he's been around for a long, long time, sort of pushing, the microdosing perspective, right? The psychedelic coffee, as it were, some people call it. But yeah, what are you finding, Rotem?
Yeah, so overall, we're finding that people who microdose fare better than people who don't microdose. That's the kind of big picture. We also find that people who the benefits that people experience from microdosing, the most common benefits are, well, the first one by far is improved mental health. People just feel better. And then people also report that they're more productive and kind of have better attention ability, which is, I think, something that a lot of people are after these days, because yeah, for sure you have the mental health crisis, but then you have people that always want to be more productive. And I think this also speaks to the biohacking community, right? We're looking to optimize our performance.
Yeah.
And then the third one, which I think is kind of, maybe it speaks to both, to flourishing and to mental health, is creativity. People are saying that they're more creative when they microdose. And as far as I know, no, I take it back. There are 2 studies that show that people who microdose are more creative. One is ours, that actually we used a task to show, to examine it, and we saw that microdosers were indeed more creative. There's another one from the Netherlands, where they administered microdoses during kind of like a mushroom conference, just to enthusiasts, and people who took psilocybin performed better on creativity tasks just after taking the substance. So I think that these are pretty promising results in terms of creativity. I think it's also important to mention the negative side effects. So our participants have reported generally not a lot. There was a paper that was published, I think, a couple of weeks ago that I was first author on, where I think something like 50% of participants, 50% of reports were there are no negative side effects, which is pretty huge, especially if you consider that microdosing may be better at improving mood than existing antidepressants. And existing antidepressants are, they're substances that cause you to gain weight, lose your sexual appetite, and kind of not care about life anymore. And from time to time, they also improve your mood. So if microdosing doesn't have these side effects, then that already puts it at an advantage in comparison. I think another important, or rather interesting at least, finding that we have from our recent survey is that intention doesn't work for microdosing the way we expect it to. So again, going back to the way the existing psychedelic theory is that when you when you are about to take a psychedelic, you need to set an intention. And you need to, and if you experience bad things, you need to lean into it, right? You don't want to avoid it because you can't escape it. And what we found is that we asked people, why did you start microdosing? And we tried to have kind of approach motivations and avoid motivations. So an example of an approach motivation is, I want to feel more positive feelings. And an example of an avoid motivation is, I want to feel less negative feelings. And we expected that people who had an approach motivation would experience more benefits because that's the running theory. And we found the opposite. We found that people who wanted to just get stuff away from them, so people who wanted to, instead of, having a better life, they wanted to have less of a bad life, those people had better outcomes. So this is really preliminary and should be taken with a grain of salt, but I think it's interesting, and this is something that we intend to look into more in future studies.
It's kind of like leaning into the trauma, right? I mean, there's discussions that are multi-generational trauma, a bunch of epigenetics, and a bunch of things that I've been playing with, NLP and whatever, breath work. But, really, oftentimes people just go in, with an experimental mind, but really the people that do go in with, I've got this particular trauma, I've got this particular issue, I've got this particular thing. The people I've spoken to that go into ayahuasca retreats, or the people that go into, sort of the more epic dosing, shamanic or guided journeying in a way, seem to get into it. And oftentimes people leave without actually, getting rid of those negative feelings of dealing with it. They just got a deeper level of understanding. So, I mean, back to microdosing as well. So you're saying that if you, with the preliminary results, if you enter, a regime of microdosing, maybe for 10 days or whatever, with the idea that you just want to address negative emotions. So you're kind of starting to find that people are generally with that setting and intention are finding a new and better way of dealing with life. Yes.
Yeah, and I think so. We tried to explain this finding because it was really surprising. So we tried to explain it in a few different ways. And I think that probably the most likely thing is that if you say, I want to feel better, it's kind of hard to quantify and assess how much better you're feeling.
Right.
And if you say, I want to use less substances or something like that, then it's much easier for you to then say, yeah, I did get the thing that I wanted out of it. I think that it's also possible that some of the, some health behaviors that are bad, they have serious downstream effects. So if you're using substances in a way that's unhealthy, then that probably is affecting your sleep and your productivity and your mood and a variety of other things. And then if you've treated just that one important thing upstream, you get all these benefits downstream. So it may have biased the way we analyzed the responses we got. But yeah, I think that if you approach it with kind of a concrete thing that you want to tackle, then you are more likely to get benefits.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. I mean, from this research, where do we end up? Because, are we going to end up with, off the shelf, psychedelics where people can literally take something on a per day basis without prescription? Will it be doctor prescribed? I mean, we know that the more traditional medical community is still hugely skeptical on this, right? What's the timelines looking like? Is this like 2 or 3 years away? I was just reading about Numinous, which is a company based out of Vancouver, BC, and I know some of the people there. They've got a license to legally harvest psilocybin from mushrooms, and a license for, I think, MDMA and DMT and all the usual suspects as well. And that's a step in the right direction. You've got Field Trip, which is a company out of the States, which is, guided psychotherapy and therapeutics, right? I mean, I'm trying to work out where we're going, because it seems like preliminary research and everything I've read over the last 10 years seems that this is a really, really smart idea for a lot of people versus going down the pharmaceutical route, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think, if I'm not mistaken, Field Trip are a Toronto-based company.
Oh, are they Toronto-based? Yeah, excuse me.
Yeah, I think that's a great question you're asking. I think, it has been my experience. I've spoken to a lot of physicians and press and just, regular lay people, regular folk. And I don't think that people are cautious about this at all. I think people are extremely optimistic about the promise of psychedelics. I think that the politics are taking a little bit longer than what I would expect, considering the promise and considering the political will. I think the public is really ready for this and is really cheering this on. But I think it's going to take probably 5 more years. I think in Canada. I think in the States they're really close. The psilocybin has breakthrough therapy status.
Right.
And USONA are pushing very, very strongly to get that finalized. So I think they're probably closer in the States, but they have a different model than the way we do in Canada and in other European countries in terms of healthcare. I think they're highly profit motivated because, for obvious reasons. I don't know how legislation would go. I don't know how these substances are going to be regulated, and I think that's anyone's guess. But my perception, you can get LSD now illegally for $5 a hit. You can get psilocybin mushrooms for, I don't know what they cost, but also not a ridiculous amount of money. So right. I believe that if what happens is that these substances become legal, but only in pharmaceutical forms, I think the black market will continue to thrive.
Yeah, and that's what we're finding with edible edibles and cannabis and all that. The black market is still there and it's still thriving and whatever. I mean, there are still stores that you can go into in various parts of Canada and go up to, and you can buy cannabis, and you can also buy mushrooms. You can buy peyote. You know, I lived in Vancouver for about 11 years, so it's a little bit like that out there, right? It's kind of interesting to me. For me, you know, when I have a conversation with older people, you know, 60s, 70s, 80-year-olds, you know, there's still this huge stigma because, like, in the 60s, you know, the American government was experimenting with psychedelics. Even like at University of Saskatchewan, I think there was a researcher there chatting to Aldous Huxley, and they came up with the term psychedelic as part of their conversation. But suddenly it all got shut down because, you know, hey man, like the kids are like tuning in and dropping out, and they're switching on. You know, Timothy Leary, like follow the Pied Piper, and suddenly, you know, this smear campaign on all of this has sort of left this cultural sort of problem as well. And as soon as you chat to like a 60 or 70-year-old that's actually done an ayahuasca retreat, or they've done some psilocybin, or even they've done some edible cannabis, sort of, you know, just to help with mood or whatever, everything changes. I think we've forgotten of the beauty and the possibility here. But with this route, I mean, what world do you want to see? You know, with psychedelics integrated into it.
Yeah, I've been initially, when I started doing this research, I was really hoping that I'd be able to stay non-political and just, you know, do the research and keep my head down and not talk about politics. But yeah, I don't think that it's realistic so much anymore. I think that Mark Hayden from MAPS Canada has a good idea about maybe getting something like akin to a driver's license, where you go, you see a therapist, and they make sure that you're sound of mind, and then you get a license to purchase psychedelics for a few years, and then you have to come back for a checkup from time to time. I think that is quite reasonable. Ultimately, I don't know that we need to be regulating substances. I think that it kind of flies in the face of what we like. If we believe in democracy, if we believe that every single adult is intelligent and has agency, then we need to trust them to, and we trust them to eat properly and drink and all that stuff. Then and you know, people can buy as much coffee as they want, and coffee can absolutely kill you, and the same for alcohol. So if we trust people with those substances, we should be able to trust people with other substances too. Or we need to decide that we don't trust people and we want to be a different kind of society. So I think that if we want to keep being a democracy, if we like, the logical conclusion to assuming that people are agentic and intelligent is that they need to be able to do what they want as long as they're not harming anyone else.
And this sort of brings us on to talk about, you know, what we talked about at the beginning when I was reading out your biography, open science, the importance of open science. I mean, and the ability to have people that are openly experimenting. I mean, when I went to school in the UK, I grew up in the Southwest and very rural. Magic mushrooms grew all over my school rugby pitch, right? And you know,
nice.
Literally. But you know, out here in Ontario, a lot of places in the world, you go out into the wild and these things live out there. But the idea of open science is that anyone could find that and then go away and start to establish their own practice of discovery, right? So how does open science play into this? Because that directly is an affront to big pharmaceuticals. You know, more equity, more access to product. Less need to pay a lot of money for it, and even provide provision of this stuff for free, right?
Agreed. Honestly, my perspective on open science is more because of how important it is to have this set of practices so that our findings are reliable and consistent. I think I believe fundamentally that we should be sharing everything that we can. We should share, especially if it doesn't cost us anything. So if I have already collected data, there's absolutely no reason for me to not share it with others. And specifically from the scientific perspective, the reason it's important is due to something called the replication crisis. I don't know if you know your audience better than me. Do you think that this is something people would know? I should maybe tell about it in a minute.
Please explain the replication crisis. Yeah.
Sure. So I'll give it just a quick minute. The idea in science is that if I have an experimental design and I run it and I get a certain set of results, and then I give it to you, Nick, and you run it, and you're supposed to get very similar results, maybe the exact same results, because what we're trying to do is measure properties of reality, right? And the way we make sure that that is indeed what's going on is by replicating. So I have my design and I run it, and then you run my design and you make sure that you got the same thing, because maybe what I got was by mistake, random, I don't know, whatever, anything could happen. And this is something that has been absolutely not done, especially in psychology, but also health sciences for most of this, I would say, second half of the 20th century. And then in 2011, a few notable psychologists published this paper. They tried to replicate 100 canonical psychology experiments, and 67 did not replicate. So less than half of what we think we know in social psychology is actually for real. And even then, some of that, the effects are much smaller than what was originally found. And then that started this whole like, oh shit, all the foundations to the entire scientific structure are all rotten to the core. What do we do now? And then a lot of people, you know, the old guard are like, whoa, it's fine. We've been doing this forever and we don't need to change anything. And the young guys like me are saying, well, maybe there is something we can do. And the best thing we can do is we can just share everything we do openly. And then other people can make sure that we did our work properly. We didn't hide anything. We didn't mess around. Because there's a lot of ways to make your results fit your theory. And that is a bad practice. It's good short term for your career, but it's bad for the field long term, because your results will not replicate and other people are going to try and build on what you did, and it's going to fail. And just
sorry, Rotem, Karen.
Sorry, just as an aside, this is capitalism at work. This is publish or perish. This is people only caring about getting ahead in their careers because the publishing is the currency that they need. And yeah, this is the perverse incentive system that we have in academia that needs to be changed. Sorry, what did you want to say?
Yeah, no, it's exactly what I was going to say. Like, this is open science is anti-capitalist, anti-monetization. You know, if you go back to psychology, and I hold a Bachelor of Science in Psychology and Computing as well. If you look at Freud was a deeply unscientific process, you know, behind the majority of his work. Ultimately weaponized by Edward Bernays, his nephew. And then the entire modern world of PR and marketing was sort of boosted and created off the back of, you know, all sorts of problems with our identity around sex and sexualization and those things. And even things like the Rosenhan experiment, or what's also known as the Thud experiment, sort of going in and suddenly a group of researchers actively getting interred in psychiatric rehabilitation facilities across the US. And those people keeping them there for months, even though there was nothing wrong with them, apart from they said, I just hear a voice in my head saying this. It's kind of like, it completely calls out the screwed up nature of even science and how science was done to their relationship to capitalism and whatever. And you can even go into, you know, open prisons and how, you know, decarceration is a positive thing versus an active capitalist society around prison populations, places like the US, for example, as well. Mm-hmm. So that, you know, I've worked with people in open science, and it's like this beautiful world of sharing. But is there a point where, you know, we get this, you know, we can replicate? There are thousands of people out there. How can we trust that everyone's doing the same thing? You know, where are these boundaries of of control? And this comes back to microdosing. You know, how do you know everyone's kind of doing it the same thing, taking it at the same time with the same kind of doses or the same kind of resiliency to the effects of LSD microdose or whatever?
Yeah, I'm very happy you ask. I think that the most important thing we can do to keep people accountable is what's called pre-registration. Right now, the way science is done most of the time is people just, there's so many metaphors for this. It's like you, there's, sorry, you're going to have to cut this out. I'm like babbling.
It's okay. I can edit these things as well, Rotem.
Okay, sorry. The way science is being done right now is people just ask 1,000 questions and then they only report the few questions that got significant results. And that often means that those significant results just happen by chance and not systematically. What pre-registration does is you say in advance what you're about to do. You write up your entire plan, and then it remains embargoed, so no one can access it. But when the time comes for you to submit your manuscript to a journal, you also show your pre-registration, and you say, look, this was my plan. And then you show this is what I did, and the two match. And if they don't match, then I am explicit about it. This is something that only occurred to me later. Or this is an exploratory analysis that we should take with a grain of salt. And this is how we keep people accountable. You basically keep yourself accountable. You stick to your plan. Instead of bringing a bunch of, you want to build a house, what you do is first you make a plan, and then you order the parts, and then the parts make a house. And what people are doing in science is they just order a bunch of parts and then try and build whatever house they can out of it. And the parts that they ended up not using, they just sweep under the rug. And that's dangerous. So what I would encourage anyone who reads scientific work is don't believe it if it's not pre-registered.
Right. So this has been a fascinating conversation. We've literally gone from psychedelics and work you're doing into open science, and I just want to bring it back. What's next for the Canadian Centre for Psychedelic Science, and how are you tapping into that open science community with the work that you're doing?
So I think my colleagues and I published a paper about the importance of open science in psychedelics a few months ago, and I think it was well received. We are trying to, whenever I talk to another researcher, I encourage them to pre-register and use open science. And I say that I'm always happy to help. So if any of your listeners are scientists or science enthusiasts and they want to talk about that, I am more than happy. Please reach out to me. I love talking about open science. You may not have noticed this about me, but I love talking about open science.
I've chatted to a lot of people over the years. It's so good because everything from splicing DNA to, experimenting with all different kinds of substance, whatever. It's just, it's a beautiful new world. And it's a direct affront to the, multi-billion-dollar industry of big pharma.
Mm-hmm, for sure. And then in terms of our plans, we are hopefully going to start our microdosing trial soon. We've been working on it for quite a while, and we've run into some issues, but I think we've pretty much dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's practically there. But yeah, if people are interested in chatting about that, also, they feel free to shoot me an email. We are not recruiting. So if you want to be included in the trial, we are not recruiting yet. So don't email me about that.
Yeah, so I'm gonna put a link to your paper on open science and psychedelics. I'm also gonna put a link to where people can contact you and read more about the Canadian Centre for Psychedelic Science. But this is truly a fascinating conversation. I've been following psychedelics and that movement over the last few years, and even like 5 years ago, people in the workplaces that I was working in were like, you can't talk about this. And it's like, you just wait. And now we're at this point that we are in the psychedelic renaissance, and Rotem, it's absolutely great to have people like you on the ground doing this work, and it's fabulous to be connected with you. Can you just tell people where they can contact you?
Thanks very much for the kind words. Yeah, for sure. I think the best way to contact me is either through the Center for Psychedelic Science website, which is psychedelicscience.ca, or if they want to contact me directly, my website is petranker.com.
And we'll put those links down in the description of this podcast. Rotem, it's been absolutely fascinating chatting to you. We could probably talk about this for hours and hours, and we may do that. when we can actually finally meet in person and grab a coffee or,
That'd be
whatever,
fun.
when the world is less crazy. So Rotem Petranker from the Canadian Centre for Psychedelic Science and the Psychedelic Studies Research Program at the University of Toronto, I want to say thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to speaking to you again.
Thank you, Nick. This was an absolute delight. Really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.